The stars above the planet Valera shone with a cold, distant light, but inside the grand palace of Liara, the air was warm and tense. Liara, the young princess of the Cerethian Empire, moved gracefully through the corridors, her long silver robes brushing the polished floors. Her expression was calm, but her heart raced. Today was the day she would marry a human, a species considered fragile and weak by her people. The thought alone made some of the alien nobles scoff, whispering about her choice behind her back. Her human husband, Ethan, waited in the central hall. He stood quietly, his posture humble, his hands folded in front of him. He was gentle, soft-spoken, and seemingly powerless among the towering aliens who surrounded him. Yet there was a calm strength in his eyes, something that made Liara's heart pause for a moment every time she looked at him. As the ceremony began, the hall filled with music unlike anything on Earth. Alien instruments created sounds that danced through the air, blending harmony and resonance in ways humans could barely imagine. Liara's parents, her advisors, and the alien nobles took their seats. Whispers of doubt and curiosity filled the air. How could a human, so delicate and mild, be a worthy partner for their princess? The high priestess began the traditional Cerethian marriage ritual. Liara and Ethan stepped forward, their hands brushing lightly. Ethan looked at Liara, his brown eyes steady, showing no fear despite the grandeur and tension of the event. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. In that instant, Liara realized that humans had something her people often lacked: quiet confidence and calm under pressure. Suddenly, without warning, a loud explosion shook the palace. Smoke filled the hall and alien guards rushed to their positions. A fleet of sky raiders, mercenaries from a distant system, had attacked the palace. They did not care about diplomacy or tradition. They came for chaos and plunder. Cries of fear echoed through the hall as guests scrambled for cover. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by the sounds of alarms and shattering glass. Ethan froze for a moment, unsure what to do. He was a human, not trained for battle like the alien guards surrounding him. He could feel the panic rising in him, but he forced himself to remain calm. He saw where people were trapped, where the youngest guests were frightened, and where the attackers' weapons were aimed. He may not have been strong, but he had a mind that could think quickly, and he could act. He took Liara's hand and guided her toward a side exit, away from the immediate danger. "Follow me," he said softly, but firmly. His voice carried a quiet authority that made her feel safe even amidst the chaos. As they moved, he noticed a small group of children hiding under a balcony. Without hesitation, he led them to safety, shielding them with his body as they ran through the smoke-filled halls. The aliens around him were in shock. Humans were not supposed to act like this. They were delicate, fragile, often relying on others for protection. Yet here was a human showing courage not by fighting, but by seeing clearly in the midst of chaos and using his mind to keep others alive. Liara's heart swelled with pride and admiration. By the time they reached the inner courtyard, the raiders had set small fires along the edges of the palace. Guards fought bravely, but their numbers were small compared to the attackers. Ethan noticed the pattern of the raiders' movements. They were not organized. They relied on fear and speed, assuming the palace would fall to panic. But he could predict where they would strike next. He pointed to a narrow passage between two towers. "If we move through there, we can reach the guest chambers safely. The raiders will not follow because it's too narrow for their ships." It was a different kind of strength, not the kind measured by muscle or weapons, but by intelligence, calmness, and courage. The attackers did not realize that humans could think in ways they did not expect. While the aliens relied on brute force, Ethan relied on observation, deduction, and planning. Even though he could not fight the raiders hand-to-hand, he was already winning in a way they could not understand. Eventually, the raiders were repelled, forced to retreat by the palace's defenses and the clever maneuvers orchestrated by Ethan. The hall was in ruins, and smoke still rose from the fires, but everyone inside was alive. Liara stood in the courtyard, her silver robes dusty and torn, and looked at Ethan. He was covered in soot, his hair ruffled, his gentle hands trembling slightly from the effort, but he stood tall. "You saved them," Liara said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You saved everyone. Without you, none of us would have made it." It was a kind of power that many aliens underestimated, and one day it would change the galaxy. The nobles whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, some in admiration. The wedding that began as a scandalous choice, marrying a gentle human, had turned into an event that showcased the unique strength of humanity. Even the most skeptical looked at Ethan differently now. He was powerless in the traditional sense, but in the way that mattered most, he had more power than many who wielded weapons or ruled armies. As the palace began to recover from the attack, Liara led Ethan to a quiet terrace overlooking the stars. She held his hand, feeling the warmth of his gentle grip. "I knew humans were different," she said softly, "but I did not know they could be this remarkable. I may not lift a weapon, but I can make choices that keep people alive." The night fell, and the stars above Valora twinkled as if acknowledging the small but mighty human who had changed the course of the palace's fate. Guests returned slowly, tending to the injured and repairing what had been broken, while Ethan moved among them, offering calm words, guidance, and reassurance. No one could deny it now. Humans were different, and perhaps, in ways the galaxy would soon learn, they were extraordinary. As the first light of dawn touched the palace towers, Liara and Ethan stood side by side, watching the skies. The attack had been repelled, but it was only the beginning. The galaxy was full of dangers, full of those who underestimated humans. But Ethan had shown that even the gentlest of humans could make the impossible happen when courage, intelligence, and heart combined. Liara placed her hand over his, feeling the steady pulse of determination beneath the gentle exterior. "The galaxy does not know it yet," she said softly, "but they are about to meet humans who cannot be ignored. We will face it together, one choice, one act, one step at a time." The stars watched silently as the human husband and the alien princess stood together, ready for the challenges the galaxy would bring, unaware that this day, the day of his seeming powerlessness, was only the beginning of a story that would echo across the stars. After the raiders had been driven away, the palace settled into an uneasy quiet. The halls were scarred by fire and debris, and servants moved quickly, tending to the injured and repairing the damage. The nobles whispered constantly, their eyes flicking toward Ethan. The human had acted decisively, calmly, and wisely when chaos struck. Many of them still could not believe it. A human they thought was supposed to be weak and powerless. Yet here he was, alive and respected, guiding the frightened and saving lives with nothing but his mind and courage. Liara walked beside him through the damaged corridors. She could feel the subtle shift in the way the palace regarded her husband. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with awe, and a few, rare and quiet, nodded in approval, as if recognizing something extraordinary in his gentle gaze. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, placing a hand on his arm. Ethan nodded, brushing soot from his sleeve. "I will be, but the palace, it will take time to recover, and not just from the attack. Some people here will never forget that a human helped them survive." Liara's advisors began discussing new security measures, and the Council of Nobles debated strategies. Ethan followed them, listening carefully. He noticed small details the aliens overlooked, gaps in patrols, weaknesses in gates, and patterns in how the nobles moved. He spoke only when necessary, but when he did, his words were clear and practical. "The Northwest Tower is lightly guarded in the mornings," he said. "If the raiders return, that will be the first place they target." She had always known humans were different, but Ethan's actions and observations confirmed it in ways even she could not have imagined. Here was a creature her people considered weak, yet he could see patterns, predict movements, and plan solutions in a matter of seconds. That evening, in the private study of her palace quarters, Liara and Ethan reviewed the palace's defenses. Maps of the surrounding lands, patrol schedules, and reports from scouts covered the table. Ethan moved pieces on the map, showing where reinforcements should be placed and how escape routes could be made safer. "You understand strategy very differently from the aliens," Liara observed, leaning over his shoulder. "You think ahead, consider what the enemy expects, and plan around it. Most of my generals react only after things happen." Celebrations were muted, and the wedding feast had been postponed. Yet even as normalcy returned, whispers of intrigue and danger began to surface. Some nobles resented Ethan, fearing that his growing influence might undermine their authority. Others admired him quietly, realizing that the human could become an ally or a formidable obstacle, depending on how they approached him. Ethan remained calm through it all. He did not seek power, did not demand attention, and never raised his voice. He simply observed, learned, and helped wherever he could. Slowly, the aliens around him began to recognize a different kind of strength, the strength of patience, insight, and quiet determination. One afternoon, Liara received a report that troubled her. "There are rumors of a spy within the palace," she said, her voice low. Someone feeding information to rival factions. I cannot trust even some of the nobles who attended the wedding. He noticed patterns that others had ignored. Repeated visits to certain rooms, small changes in guard behavior, unusual delays in messages. The spy is cautious, he said slowly, but cautious in ways that are predictable. We can catch them if we set a trap. Sometimes being gentle allows you to see things others overlook. People act differently around those they underestimate. Within a few days, their suspicions were confirmed. A minor noble, greedy and ambitious, had been leaking information to a rival faction hoping to destabilize Liara's rule. Liara was impressed. "You saw this while everyone else missed it," she said. "You do not rely on strength, yet you accomplish what armies sometimes fail to do." Sometimes it is about seeing clearly and acting wisely. Even those who had doubted him began to reconsider what humans were truly capable of. Meanwhile, Liara and Ethan grew closer. In private moments, she observed the way he interacted with everyone. He never belittled anyone, never demanded obedience, yet he inspired trust. Servants followed his instructions without hesitation. Soldiers listened when he offered suggestions, and even the nobles began to approach him for advice. All of this without any display of power, without a single threat or show of force. One evening, while the sun set over the palace towers, Liara and Ethan walked along the terrace overlooking the gardens. The sky was painted with hues of orange and violet, reflecting on the calm waters of the fountains below. "Do you ever feel frustrated," Liara asked, "that your people are so fragile compared to us? We may not have claws or wings or the strength of your species, but we have minds and hearts that can overcome much more than brute force. Sometimes, being gentle is the greatest strength of all." The human's ability to endure, to think, and to act with clarity under pressure made them formidable in ways her people had never understood. The next day, news arrived that a distant warlord had heard of the raiders' attack and the human who helped save the palace. The warlord, a ruthless alien with a reputation for conquest, viewed humans as weak, and yet he had become curious. If this human could survive and act decisively, perhaps there was more potential in humanity than he had believed. Liara read the message with concern. "He is powerful, dangerous, and cunning," she said. "If he decides to come, the palace may face a real threat. We may be outnumbered, but being human has taught me that the mind is often more valuable than muscle, and together we can face him." She realized that this human, her husband, had a kind of power her people had never recognized, a power that came from insight, courage, and determination. In the days that followed, Ethan worked tirelessly. He reorganized the palace defenses, trained select guards in observation and quick thinking, and devised strategies for communication and intelligence gathering. All of it was done without fanfare, without ego, and without physical violence. Yet slowly, his presence reshaped the palace. Humans were underestimated, yes, but now even the most skeptical nobles began to see the value in patience, logic, and quiet courage. Liara watched him as he moved among the palace staff and guards, helping, guiding, and instructing with calm authority. She realized that humans had a unique form of leadership. They did not demand loyalty through fear or status. They earned it through trust, intelligence, and empathy. By the end of the second week, the palace was ready for anything. The raiders might return, rival nobles might plot, and the distant warlord might act. But the people were united under a leader no one had expected. A gentle, powerless human who had proven that true strength often came in unexpected forms. Liara placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder as they looked out over the horizon. "The galaxy will soon see what humans can do," she said softly. Ethan smiled, his eyes calm and steady. "They already are seeing it, Liara, and we will show them even more." He had no wings, no claws, no brute strength, but he had intelligence, courage, and heart. And in the vast reaches of space, those qualities were far more powerful than anyone had realized. The palace on Valora had recovered from the raider attack, but the air remained tense. Guards patrolled more often, nobles whispered quietly in the halls, and Liara's eyes often sought out her husband, Ethan, to see if he felt the pressure of responsibility. He moved among them calmly, never showing doubt, never raising his voice. The aliens who once doubted humans now watched him closely, realizing that what he lacked in physical strength, he made up for with sharpness, foresight, and understanding. Ethan had begun exploring the outer halls of the palace, curious about every corner. Unlike most humans, he did not shrink from alien architecture or strange technologies. While the aliens often ignored old areas, seeing them as outdated or useless, Ethan observed with care. His natural curiosity and intuition led him to the archives, a section of the palace long abandoned and mostly forgotten. Dust covered the floors, and many of the devices lay dormant, their lights dim and unused. Among the artifacts and machinery, Ethan discovered something that made his heart race. It was a small, cylindrical device, simple in appearance, yet clearly advanced. Symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly when he touched it. He had seen technology like this in old human texts, tools that could amplify energy and adapt it to different tasks. But the Sorethians had never mastered it. To them, it was merely a relic. To a human, it was an opportunity. He took the device to Liara's study and showed it to her. "This is a human design," he explained. "I recognize the concept. It can manipulate energy in ways the Sorethians do not understand. If I can learn to use it, we could gain an advantage, not through brute strength, but through strategy and adaptability. But this could change how we approach threats. A small barrier here, a controlled pulse there, nothing destructive, nothing violent, but enough to surprise the palace guards and even Liara herself." The first test came unexpectedly. One evening, a group of nobles argued heatedly over how to secure the palace against future attacks. Voices rose, tempers flared, and some even reached for weapons, ready to assert authority over one another. Ethan stepped forward calmly, holding the device. "Let me demonstrate a solution," he said quietly. He activated the device, and a soft field of energy formed around the group, forcing them to step back without harm. It was subtle, controlled, and precise. No one was injured, yet the message was clear. Ethan, the gentle human, could influence situations in ways they had never imagined. The nobles, stunned, lowered their weapons and exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers that followed were not of weakness anymore, but of power, of a power that relied on mind and skill, not brute force. Liara watched with pride. "You are teaching them," she said softly. "Not by commanding, but by showing. We adapt, we plan, and we use what others overlook. Strength is not always what you can see." He used the devices to create controlled energy diversions, guiding the intruders away from populated areas and leading them into traps where they could be captured without harm. The results astonished the palace staff. Humans were not supposed to have such control, such precision, but Ethan's calm, methodical approach worked. It minimized casualties, protected civilians, and outsmarted the intruders. Slowly, the story spread. The gentle human husband, who had no muscle or wings, could now manipulate energy, predict enemy movements, and keep the palace safe in ways the most powerful aliens could not. Yet Ethan did not grow proud. He continued to move quietly through the palace, observing, learning, and teaching. He instructed the guards in strategies of prediction, patience, and coordination. He showed Liara how to read patterns in behavior and anticipate problems before they occurred. His influence was growing, not through fear, not through force, but through intelligence, empathy, and careful planning. One evening, while studying maps of the surrounding territory, Ethan noticed something troubling. "The raiders were only the beginning," he said to Liara. "There is a larger force in the region, a warlord who commands fleets and armies. They have heard of us, and they will not ignore the human who saved the palace. But even with your devices and strategy, we cannot match a fleet head-on." Ethan taught the palace staff to read signs, anticipate movement, and respond to threats with calm efficiency. The aliens, once skeptical, now followed his guidance without hesitation. He did not command them, he showed them possibilities they had not considered. Slowly, their respect grew into trust. During this time, Ethan also discovered the deeper capabilities of the devices. Beyond defense, they could enhance communication, detect hidden movements, and even subtly influence the environment. With careful control, he could create protective barriers, light sources, and energy signals that were undetectable to ordinary sensors. Every day, he became more skilled, more confident, and more influential in ways the palace had never seen. Word of his abilities reached the distant warlord, who was curious and perhaps cautious. The human who had seemed weak had survived, planned, and defended an alien palace. This was unexpected. The warlord, known for attacking those he considered powerless, now paused, reassessing what humans might be capable of. Liara noticed the change in the palace. Where there had once been whispers of doubt, now there were whispers of caution. Some nobles still feared Ethan, wary of his growing influence. Others admired him, recognizing that intelligence and insight could rival physical strength. And Ethan, gentle and unassuming, continued his quiet work, not seeking glory but preparing the palace for what was to come. One night, Lyra found him in the archives, studying star charts and energy readings. He had removed his robes and sleeves were rolled up, showing a human determination in the simple, quiet way he worked. "You do not sleep much," she observed. "I am learning," he replied softly. "Humans have always learned from observation. We do not rush. We watch, we plan, and we act when the time is right." In a galaxy where strength was measured in fleets, weapons, and physical might, humans could achieve what seemed impossible without ever raising a hand. The weeks passed, and small tests confirmed his growing skill. Raids were thwarted before they reached the palace. Messages intercepted and rerouted, spies discovered, and patrols guided in ways the aliens had never considered. All of it was done without bloodshed or violence, and yet the results were undeniable. Humans were underestimated, yes, but their ingenuity and calm determination were forces to be reckoned with. Liara and Ethan spent quiet moments together discussing strategy and philosophy. "You teach them without command," Liara said one evening. "You guide them without authority. And they follow you. With you I feel prepared." His calm intelligence, his careful observation, and his growing mastery of the human devices had made him indispensable. The palace, the princess, and perhaps the galaxy itself were beginning to see the truth. Humans were not weak. They were extraordinary in their own way. And somewhere in the distant reaches of space, the warlord began to prepare, intrigued and cautious. He had heard of the human husband who saved a palace without weapons, who controlled energy through strange devices, and who outwitted spies and invaders alike. He would soon learn that humans were far more than gentle, powerless creatures. They were clever, adaptable, and capable of reshaping the very course of events with thought, patience, and courage. The galaxy had yet to witness the full potential of humanity, but the quiet, gentle human standing beside the alien princess was already changing the world. One careful, brilliant, and decisive act at a time. The tension in the palace was thicker than the evening fog that rolled over the towers of Valora. Scouts had returned with reports that the distant warlord's fleet was moving closer, a vast armada of ships unlike any the palace had faced before. Each ship bristled with weapons, and the sheer number of them promised destruction for anyone who stood in their way. The nobles whispered with anxiety, some arguing for immediate surrender, others calling for a full-scale defense. Yet in the midst of panic and uncertainty, Ethan remained calm. Liara stood beside him in the command room, maps and star charts spread across the table. She watched as he traced the paths of the approaching fleet with a steady hand, eyes focused and sharp. "How can we stop them?" she asked, though she already knew he had an answer brewing in that calm mind of his. Ethan leaned back, fingers steepled. "We do not fight them head-on. That is how they expect to win. They rely on strength, numbers, and intimidation. But humans survive by using intelligence, patience, and unexpected solutions. That is how we will turn their strength into weakness." She had seen him save the palace from raiders, uncover spies, and manipulate ancient devices in ways the Sorethians could not comprehend. But now, facing an entire fleet, the stakes were higher than ever. And if we fail? Ethan worked quietly with Liara's engineers and guards, teaching them to use the energy devices he had mastered. They set up subtle barriers around the palace grounds, invisible to ordinary sensors but capable of disrupting enemy weapons. They trained soldiers to anticipate attacks rather than react blindly, to move with precision instead of relying on brute force. The nobles, initially skeptical, began to notice changes. Guards who followed Ethan's guidance moved with efficiency, traps set according to his instructions caught intruders before they could strike, and even the smallest civilians felt safer. The whispers that once doubted humans were now tinged with awe. Ethan's influence grew quietly, steadily, like water carving a path through stone. When the warlord's fleet finally arrived, the palace faced a terrifying sight, hundreds of ships bristling with weapons, filling the sky and blocking out the stars. Many of the nobles panicked, ready to flee or surrender, yet Ethan remained composed. "We are ready," he said calmly. "They expect fear, they expect chaos. But we will show them something they do not understand: human ingenuity." The warlord's ships fired repeatedly, yet their efforts were diverted, frustrated by a power they could not see or comprehend. Liara watched, amazed. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "We adapt, we think. We do not need to match their strength, only to outsmart it." Their weapons seemed to malfunction, their attacks ineffective, and their expectations of easy victory shattered. They had assumed humans were powerless, that a single palace could not resist them. Yet here was a human, gentle and unassuming, orchestrating a defense that seemed to bend the rules of physics and common sense alike. As the battle continued, Ethan moved among the defenders, quietly guiding, adjusting, and predicting. He instructed soldiers on where to position themselves, which energy devices to activate, and how to anticipate enemy maneuvers. Every decision he made was precise, calculated, and effective. Though he did not wield a weapon in hand-to-hand combat, his influence was undeniable. Every movement of the defenders reflected his guidance, every success bore his quiet mark. The warlord, observing from his flagship, grew uneasy. "This human," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "He should be powerless, he should be weak, yet he commands the defense with thought alone. He is different." He had no brute strength, no armored suit, no personal weapons, and yet he was changing the tide of battle. His gentle, calm nature allowed him to see patterns others missed, to anticipate moves, and to act without panic. Where the aliens relied on force, he relied on observation, prediction, and adaptation. In the midst of the chaos, Ethan discovered another advantage. The warlord's fleet was vast but rigid in their tactics. They assumed traditional strategies, overconfident in their numerical superiority. Using the energy devices, Ethan created diversions that guided parts of the fleet into narrow canyons and around asteroid fields, where their ships were slowed and exposed. A few well-timed pulses disrupted engines, causing confusion and disarray among the attackers. Liara watched in awe as her husband, once considered gentle and powerless, orchestrated a defense that no alien could have imagined. "You are incredible," she said softly, though she knew he would not seek praise. Ethan shook his head. "I only do what is necessary. Humans survive by acting when the moment demands it, and we protect those who cannot protect themselves." The tide was turning, not through violence, but through intellect, planning, and adaptability. Finally, the warlord attempted a direct assault on the palace gates, hoping to crush the defenders with overwhelming force. Ethan anticipated this move. Using the devices, he created energy barriers and controlled diversions, funneling the attackers into zones where their weapons were ineffective and their numbers counted for little. One by one, the assaulting forces were neutralized, captured, or forced to retreat. By the end of the battle, the warlord's fleet had been driven off. No human or palace defender had fallen in the chaos, though the sky was scorched and debris littered the ground. The nobles, once doubtful, now bowed in respect, their fear replaced by admiration. Even the palace guards, who had relied on physical strength for generations, realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A human had led them to victory using intelligence, strategy, and gentle authority alone. Liara stood beside Ethan, her heart full of pride and gratitude. "The galaxy will never see humans the same way again," she said quietly. Ethan's calm eyes reflected the glow of the fading battle. "They may not understand us yet," he replied. "But they will. Humans are not weak. We survive, we adapt, and we protect. That is our strength." Yet here was a single human, gentle in demeanor, unarmed in the traditional sense, who had outsmarted a fleet, neutralized an enemy, and safeguarded an entire palace without raising a hand in violence. Liara knew that this moment would change everything. The gentle human beside her was no longer powerless. He had demonstrated that intelligence, patience, and empathy could achieve what brute strength alone could not. He had shown that humans could be leaders, strategists, and heroes in ways the galaxy had never anticipated. As night fell over Valora, Ethan and Liara walked through the palace gardens. The fountains reflected the soft light of the stars, and the air was calm for the first time in days. Ethan's face, so often calm and unassuming, now carried the quiet satisfaction of one who had done what needed to be done. Liara looked at him, her eyes full of admiration. "You are not just my husband," she said softly. "You are a symbol of something greater. Humans, you are extraordinary." The warlord, somewhere beyond the stars, would think twice before underestimating humans again. The palace and its people had learned a lesson they would never forget. Strength was not always measured in force, but in intelligence, courage, and heart. Liara held Ethan's hand, feeling the warmth and steadiness in his grip. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we will face it together." The gentle human, once thought powerless, had proven that true strength often came in unexpected forms. And as the stars twinkled above Valora, it was clear that humanity's story in the galaxy was only beginning. The aftermath of the battle left Valora's palace scarred but standing. Smoke still curled from distant fires, and repairs were underway in the once grand halls. Nobles and citizens alike moved with a mixture of relief and awe, having witnessed something none could have predicted. A human had defended the palace without weapons, relying only on his mind, intuition, and courage. Ethan walked through the halls, observing the repairs, offering guidance where needed, and quietly helping those who were weary or frightened. Liara followed him, silently admiring his calm confidence. He did not boast, did not seek praise, yet everyone who saw him knew he had done something extraordinary. He was no longer just the gentle human husband. He had become a symbol of hope, intelligence, and resilience. The nobles, once skeptical, now treated him with a mixture of respect and caution. Some whispered nervously, realizing that underestimating humans could be dangerous. Others approached him cautiously, seeking guidance and advice on palace matters. Ethan accepted none of it with arrogance, offering help and insight wherever he could. His power lay not in intimidation, but in clarity, foresight, and the quiet strength of a calm mind. Liara led Ethan to the terrace overlooking the surrounding lands. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the palace gardens. "The warlord will likely think twice before returning," she said softly. "He may never have faced a human like you before." Humans survive not by fear, but by action, observation, and adaptability. The galaxy may not understand this yet, but it will. The galaxy had long underestimated humans, but now, stories of Ethan's intelligence, strategy, and calm leadership were reaching ears that had never believed humans could matter on such a scale. Liara watched Ethan as he walked among the people of the palace. Guards followed his instructions with precision. Civilians sought reassurance from him. Nobles, even those who had doubted him, now consulted him on matters of security and planning. He did not demand authority, yet he held it more firmly than anyone who relied solely on power. One day, a message arrived from a neighboring system. The warlord, having observed the humans' defense, had retreated. He had sent a formal message, acknowledging the unexpected skill and intelligence of humans, and declaring he would not interfere with Valora for the time being. The nobles gathered to hear the announcement, some murmuring with relief, others still wary of future threats. Liara placed her hand over Ethan's. "The warlord acknowledges you," she said softly. "You have changed their view of humans forever." Ethan moved among the people, quietly teaching, guiding, and inspiring. Children admired him, guards respected him, and nobles could no longer dismiss him. Humans, gentle and unassuming, were now recognized as beings of intelligence, courage, and adaptability. Liara and Ethan spent quiet moments together discussing the future. "You have shown them strength," Liara said. "Not the kind of strength they expected, but the kind that matters most. Intelligence, courage, heart, humans possess all of it. And it is enough to shape the future." Even distant rulers began to hear tales of the human husband who had saved a palace without lifting a weapon. Whispers spread across systems. Humans were no longer just fragile beings to be dismissed. They were intelligent, creative, and capable of changing the outcome of even the most dire situations. Liara watched Ethan one evening as he helped a group of young cadets understand the use of the energy devices. He spoke softly, explaining principles and logic, encouraging them to think ahead, to anticipate, and to observe. The cadets listened, fascinated, following his instructions with care. He had become a teacher, a strategist, and a quiet leader, not through fear, but through wisdom. "You have changed everything," Liara said softly as they walked back to the terrace. Ethan nodded. "I have only acted as humans always do. We survive, we think, and we protect. That is what matters, and when we are trusted, we can inspire others to do the same." Humans had shown that strength was not measured by muscle or weapons, but by courage, intelligence, and the ability to act decisively when needed. Ethan, gentle and calm, had proven it. He had faced chaos, spies, raiders, and fleets, and had emerged victorious not through force, but through the quiet, unstoppable power of human ingenuity. The nobles, seeing the results, began to change their approach. They adopted human strategies in palace management, defense, and diplomacy. The palace itself became a symbol of cooperation between humans and aliens, showing that understanding, intelligence, and compassion could achieve what brute force alone could not. One afternoon, as Ethan and Liara walked through the restored gardens, they noticed children playing near a fountain. Some were human, some alien, and all were laughing freely. Ethan knelt beside one of the children, showing a simple energy device in use. The child's eyes widened in amazement, and soon other children gathered around, fascinated by the quiet genius of the human husband. Liara smiled, watching him interact with the next generation. "You are shaping the future," she said softly. "Not just here but across the galaxy, humans will be remembered." "That is enough." Liara and Ethan spent quiet evenings together discussing the future. "There will be more threats," Liara said. "Other warlords, other dangers, but with you, I feel we can face anything. Not brute force, but mind, heart, and courage." Ethan, gentle and calm, had proven that power was not always visible, that strength could come from insight and heart, and that humans, in their quiet way, could reshape the galaxy. The distant warlord, now retreating beyond the stars, carried with him a new understanding. Humans were not to be underestimated. They were clever, resourceful, and capable of achieving the impossible through thought and determination. The galaxy had been warned, humanity had arrived, and it was unstoppable in ways few could yet comprehend. Liara stood beside Ethan, holding his hand as the sun set over the palace towers. "Together, we have changed more than this palace," she said. "We have changed perceptions, beliefs, and the future." The gentle human husband, once considered powerless, had proven that true power lay not in muscle or weapons, but in intelligence, courage, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. He had protected the palace, inspired allies, and changed the galaxy's view of humanity forever. Liara placed her hand over his, feeling the steady pulse of determination beneath the gentle exterior. "The galaxy will never forget you," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "They will remember humans, not me. We act, we protect, and we survive. That is all that matters, and the future is just beginning." Children laughed, soldiers trained, and nobles planned with newfound respect. And at the center of it all stood Ethan, gentle and calm, no longer powerless, but a living testament to the intelligence, courage, and heart of humans. The galaxy had seen what humans could do, and it would never underestimate them again.